Hey everybody, how's it going? This is John Breeden. It is Friday, February 7th, 2020. It is my first show of the year, and we got a big week coming up, everybody. It is Daytona Speed Weeks, officially, and this Sunday is the Busch Clash at Daytona, starting at 3 o'clock on Sunday. And of course, 9 days from today will be the Daytona 500. So it's a big week for NASCAR fans. So we got a lot to talk about. And first off, I'm going to go through the Speed Weeks schedule because obviously it can get confusing because there's so many practices and qualifyings going on that it's crazy how much these guys are on the track for Speed Weeks. So today, Cup cars are not on the track until tomorrow, but they do in fact have ARCA race in practice at 1:30, first practice. Final practice is at 3 o'clock. Those are not televised, but the ARCA race is, of course, tomorrow at 4:45, the Lucas Oil 200 driven by General Tire. You can catch that on FS1. And looks like qualifying for that is at 12:30 tomorrow, but that is also not televised. But so for the Cup, they are not on the track today, but they do have at 2:30, looks like sort of a media day. It's called Press Pass, and you can, in fact, watch it live on NASCAR.com at 2:30. And tomorrow will be the first time the cars hit the racetrack since November. And at 11:35 tomorrow morning is the Busch Clash practice, and you can catch that on FS1. There's only one practice for the Busch Clash. Then at 1:35, also on FS1, is Daytona 500 first practice. That's going to be on FS1, or you can listen on MRN. And then the second practice is at 3 o'clock. You can also catch that on FS1 or MRN. Sunday, a big day. Daytona 500 qualifying is at 12:30 Eastern on Fox. And there's another NASCAR Press Pass, which is titled Post Qualifying. So you can also watch that live. So I guess these Press Passes, I'm now seeing a few of these now. I guess they're kind of just media scrums after the race. So looks like that's at least something new. Maybe I didn't see that last year, but yeah, you can catch those. And then, of course, the Busch Clash, 3 o'clock Eastern on FS1. And then following the race, another Press Pass post-Clash. And you can also watch that live on NASCAR.com. So the cars will be off the track until Thursday. And Thursday, we pick it up with Gander Outdoor Truck Series first practice and final practice, back-to-back, 4:05 Eastern. First practice on FS2, final practice 5:30 on FS1. Then 7 o'clock Thursday night is the Blue-Green Vacations Duel. That's duel number 1, starting at 7 o'clock. They are, in fact, the Blue-Green Vacations Duels this year. Of course, they were formerly the Can-Am Duels. Of course, catch that on FS1, and then the second duel starts at 8:45, also on FS1. So then Friday, the Xfinity Series hits the track for the first time. First practice for them, 2:05 Eastern on FS1. Final practice, 4:32 p.m. Eastern on FS1. And then Truck Series qualifying is going to be at 3:10 p.m. Eastern on FS1. I know I'm going out of order here, but I saw the Xfinity Series was on first, and I was like, well, I'll get the Xfinity practice times out of the way. So in between the two Xfinity practices is Gander Outdoor qualifying. And then you can catch that race, the Gander Outdoor Truck Race, 7:30 p.m. Eastern on FS1, the Next Era Energy 250. Daytona 500 third practice is at 5:05 Eastern on FS1. And then Saturday, qualifying for the Xfinity Series at 11 a.m. Eastern on FS1. And then 2:30 p.m. Eastern, the NASCAR Racing Experience 300, the NASCAR Xfinity Series opener. FS1 at 2:30. Daytona 500 final practice is also that day, in between qualifying and the Xfinity race. It's at 12:30 Eastern on FS1. So 5 Daytona 500 practices. And then, I apologize, 4 Daytona 500 practices. I was counting the Busch Clash, but there's in fact 4 for the Daytona 500, 1 for the Busch Clash. And then Sunday, February 16th, 2:30 p.m. Eastern, is the run-in of the Daytona 500 on Fox, or you can listen on MRN. So that's this week's schedule. Definitely a packed schedule. Lots of stories going into this weekend. And I have a lot to talk about. First, I want to talk about Kyle Busch. So Kyle Busch is, of course, your reigning 2-time NASCAR Cup Series champion, formerly known as the Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series. Of course, it is well documented that Monster Energy is no longer the primary sponsor of the Cup Series. It is simply now the NASCAR Cup Series. So Kyle Busch is your defending champion going into this year, and I definitely think the big talk is the fact that, Kyle Busch has still yet to win a Daytona 500. And I was just thinking about it. He's pretty much in the same scenario that Dale Earnhardt was, when Dale Earnhardt was trying for so many years to try and win the 500, and he had accomplished pretty much everything at that point. Well, Kyle Busch is pretty much the same. I mean, if you look at Kyle Busch's stats, he's now a multiple-time Cup champion. He's won over 50 races in the Cup Series. He's won the Brickyard 400, the Coke 600. He's won the Southern 500, the All-Star race. I mean, he's won all the marquee big races except for this race, except for the Daytona 500. And he has won at Daytona. He won the July Daytona race back in 2008. He's won the the Clash 2012. He won that. And so, yeah, I mean, and you can look at the rest of his stats. I mean, he has over 200 wins across all 3 series, 96 in the Xfinity Series, 56 in Truck, 56 in Cup. I mean, he's done it all, except for win this race. So to me, I mean, Kyle comes in here with the same stakes that Dale Earnhardt had. Dale Earnhardt, of course, the well-documented story that, he had done it all. And this race, he had never been able to win the Daytona 500. And finally, after 20 years, his 20th start in the race, he finally won the Daytona 500. And Kyle Busch still looking for his first. And, another guy who pretty much accomplished everything except win the Daytona 500 was Tony Stewart. And unfortunately for Tony, he was never able to get his Daytona 500 win. But Kyle, if you remember, finished second in the 500 last year, almost won it. And, of course, went on to win the championship later that year at Homestead in a pretty much dominating finish to that Homestead race. I know, of course, I think Truex was really dominating early in that race, and then somehow switched the tires. His pit crew switched the tires, and he had to come back down pit road. Didn't cost him a championship, though, because he did get back on the lead lap. He was just never able to get back to the lead. So, anyway, Kyle Busch, your reigning champion going into this weekend. I'm definitely going to be keeping a close eye on him. We'll see. We'll see if Kyle can finally get that Daytona win. I don't know if it's going to happen this year or not. I mean, we'll see. I know he's coming off the championship, and sometimes when you, the year after winning a championship, sometimes you don't come out of the boxes hot, and, it takes you a little bit to get going in the season, and sometimes, you come out and you start swinging, and you build toward your, a back-to-back championship season. So we'll see if Kyle can win the Daytona 500. It's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, another big story going into 2020 and going into Daytona weekend is Jimmie Johnson. Jimmie Johnson, of course, over the offseason, announced his retirement. He announced that 2020 was going to be his final full-time season in the NASCAR Cup Series. And I know this actually surprised some people that this was, in fact, the decision Jimmie was going to make, but I kind of saw this coming even before he said, I knew in September, around that time, he said he was going to make an announcement in 4 to 6 months. And of course, if you do the math on that, that's right around the offseason and Daytona time. So I kind of figured he was going to announce that 2020 was going to be his last year. But I kind of sensed it before. I mean, Jimmie, these past 2 seasons have not been good to Jimmie Johnson. You could even go back to mid-2017 and say, that's when the decline started to happen for him. And it's just not been a good past couple of years, whatever it may have been. I mean, whether it was Lowe's leaving him or, the split up with Chad Knaus last year or whatever, it's not been a good run for Jimmie Johnson these past 2 years. I mean, think about this. Jimmie Johnson missed the playoffs last year. Jimmie Johnson was, in fact, up until last year, the only driver to be a part of every chase/playoffs in the NASCAR Cup Series. And, of course, that changed after last year. But whatever it may have been, I'm not so sure. Maybe it's, who knows? Who knows what it is? But the reality is I do not believe these past 2 years will obviously define Jimmie Johnson's historical career. I mean, you talk about 7 championships, over 80 wins, 2 Daytona 500s. I mean, the list goes on and on. I mean, 5 straight championships between 2006 and 2010. And, I mean, he's just had a historical career. And, yeah, I mean, while this decision didn't surprise me, well, I'm not surprised that Jimmie's leaving. These past couple of years, even no matter what he does in 2020, I don't think these seasons should define his overall career, because he has had a great career, and he's arguably one of the greatest of all time. And he's no question a first ballot Hall of Famer. And so there you go. How do I see his 2020 season going? I do see him getting in victory lane one more time. I know, obviously, Jeff Gordon pulled off that Martinsville win in his last year and raced for a championship in his last race. I guess you could say his last race for the 24 car, because if you remember, he did come out of retirement for those couple of races with Dale Jr., but it was ultimately supposed to be his last race. And then Tony Stewart in 2016, the next year, won in Sonoma in a crazy finish with Denny Hamlin, getting his last win. Dale Earnhardt Jr., though, was not able to get one more Cup win in his final season, but I just have a feeling it's going to happen for Jimmie Johnson. I think Jimmie he's accomplished so much, and I just think it's going to happen for him. I think he's going to loosen up now. I know here's the thing. I mean, he's got his back against the wall. He knows this is his last 36 races of his career, supposedly. I mean, he could always do part-time races and things like that, do a part-time schedule, but this is ultimately his last year. So I just think he's going to be determined to get a win. I don't think he's going to win a championship, though. I just don't see the 8 happening for Jimmie. I just think the ship has kind of sailed on that one. I don't see it happening, but I do see him getting one more checkered flag and riding off into the sunset with a great career. So that's Jimmie Johnson. He is going to be in his final Cup season this year. It really is hard to believe that Jimmie Johnson is going to be retiring. I mean, it was just a couple of years ago. I remember, it just seemed like he wouldn't stop winning. Between that 2006-2010 period, he just wouldn't stop winning. And even through, the early 2010s, 2013 won a championship. 2016 pulled off that 7th championship. And believe it or not, Jimmie Johnson's last win to date was back in Dover of 2017. So it's been almost 3 years since Jimmie Johnson has won in the Cup Series. Of course, if you're not counting the Busch clash from last year, which of course does not count by points, but I suppose you can count that as get in a checkered flag. But yeah, there you go. Jimmie Johnson is in his final Cup Series season here in 2020. The NASCAR Hall of Fame, speaking of Hall of Fame, the NASCAR Hall of Fame class of 2020 was inducted last Friday. The class was led by Tony Stewart, who also went in with Bobby Labonte, Joe Gibbs, Waddell Wilson, and Buddy Baker, all going in the Hall of Fame. In fact, NASCAR announced, I believe yesterday that, or it might have been 2 days ago, not sure, but they announced that they are reducing the number of Hall of Fame inductees from 5 to 3 for now on. They're going to induct 2 modern era drivers and then 1 pioneer driver. So, yeah, it's going to be, they're narrowing it down. I like the idea because I think, you don't want to get too many guys in the Hall of Fame to where, maybe you'll question like, oh, why is this guy in the Hall of Fame, So I think if you narrow it down to 3 guys, I think that works better. And I'm not so sure how the modern era pioneer thing is going to work, but I would just narrow it down to 3 and then just vote, whoever in. But apparently there's only going to be, I think, 10 nominees to choose from for the modern era class, and then I think like 5 for the pioneer class. So they're really narrowing it down to who they want in this Hall of Fame. So yeah, we'll see. So I did watch the Hall of Fame last week. I thought it was really good. I always like listening to the speeches from the drivers all getting inducted, and the crew chiefs and the owners. And of course, Tony Stewart got inducted. He had a great speech. You can go watch it, of course. It's probably all over YouTube, and I really got to thinking that while Tony Stewart, I don't think you can make the argument that he's the greatest NASCAR driver of all time. I think you can obviously say he's one of the greatest. You could definitely put him in the top 10 as far as NASCAR drivers, but I was really thinking that he may be the best overall auto racing driver of all time. And I'll tell you why. So not only has Tony Stewart won 49 Cup races, 3 NASCAR championships, but you got to remember, this guy, just about any car you put Tony Stewart in, like, he's got a shot at winning. And, he even went to IndyCar before he went to NASCAR and won the 1997 Indy Racing League Championship. He was the 1995 USAC Triple Crown champion. He was the 1994 USAC National Midget Series champion. Tony Stewart, just whether it's an Indy car or whether it's a dirt car or a stock car, like, Tony Stewart has a shot at winning. And I'm looking at his stats here. 2-time Chili Bowl winner. He was inducted into the 2016 USAC Hall of Fame in 2016. So many accomplishments for Tony Stewart. And, you could argue, who's the best NASCAR driver of all time? Obviously, a lot of people will say Richard Petty. Richard Petty was the greatest of all time. 200 wins, 7 championships. A lot of people will say Dale Earnhardt was the best of all time. 7 championships, 76 wins. I've even heard people say Jeff Gordon is the greatest of all time. 93 wins and 4 championships. They're all up there. That's like the big 3, I think. And, obviously you can make arguments for Jimmie Johnson, whether he's the greatest of all time. He's definitely up there as well. And, that's for NASCAR, but, if you were to put them in an Indy car or a dirt car, how good would they do? And, Tony Stewart, of course, won a championship in IndyCar, and he's, won so many dirt races. I just think, any car you put Tony Stewart in, he has the capability of winning. So to me, I almost think Tony Stewart is the greatest overall driver of all time. And, another stat is when Tony Stewart did the double, the Memorial Day double, the Indy 500 and the Coca-Cola 600 all in one day. He had I believe, the best average finish between both races. And I forget where exactly he finished, but I think he finished like 4th in the Indy 500 and then 5th or 6th in the Coke 600. And, I mean, just to have the ability to do that, to run 1,100 miles in one day between the Indianapolis Speedway and the Charlotte Motor Speedway, I mean, that's just incredible. So, I mean, it's just something to think about. But I personally think the overall best driver, in auto racing history may just be Tony Stewart. So, just something to think about. And, of course, like I said, Tony Stewart, inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. He was part of the class of 2020. All right, so now it's time for me to get to the Clash this weekend. So we do have the Busch Clash, and they are, in fact, renaming it Busch. Of course, you remember previous years, it was the Advanced Auto Parts Clash. But now this year, for the first time since 1997, they are naming it the Busch Clash, and I'm trying to get the entry list pulled up here. Here we go. The 42nd annual Busch Clash at Daytona. Of course, it is this Sunday, 3 o'clock on FS1. I'm just going to go through the entry list here, and then I'm going to give you my prediction for the race. So, there are 18 entrants, and in fact, there were supposed to be 20, but Daniel Suarez was decided to opt out of this race. Of course, Daniel Suarez now with a new team, Gaunt Brothers Racing, and he decided to opt out. And Daniel Hemrick was also eligible for the Clash, but he does not have a Cup ride for 2020, so he's out. So there are 18 entrants for this year's Clash. So here we go. We have Kurt Busch for Chip Ganassi Racing, Brad Keselowski for Team Penske, Austin Dillon for Richard Childress Racing, Kevin Harvick for Stewart Haas Racing, Ryan Newman for Roush Fenway Racing, Chase Elliott for Hendrick Motorsports, Eric Almirola for Stewart Haas Racing, Denny Hamlin, Joe Gibbs Racing, Ryan Blaney, Team Penske, Clint Bowyer, Stewart Haas Racing, Kyle Busch, Joe Gibbs Racing, Martin Truex Jr., Joe Gibbs Racing, Eric Jones, Joe Gibbs Racing. We have Joey Logano for Team Penske, William Byron for Hendrick Motorsports, Kyle Larson for Chip Ganassi Racing, Jimmie Johnson in his final Clash start for Hendrick Motorsports, and then Alex Bowman also for Hendrick Motorsports. So if you look at the last 5 winners of the Clash, 2019 was Jimmie Johnson. Everybody remembers that one, right? The rain-shortened race, and that ended in a wreck. And I think Paul Menard led like every single lap up until the rain came. There's about, I think, like 15 laps to go, and Jimmie pulled to the inside. Menard kind of went to block a little bit. Jimmie kind of came up at the same time, and chaos ensued. And after that wreck, rain came, and they finished the race. They shortened the race down. Jimmie Johnson was declared the winner. So, yeah, great memories. And 2018, the winner there was Brad Keselowski, which I recall, I think he started in the back in that one and raced his way to the front. 2017 was Joey Logano. That one I can remember because it was Keselowski leading on the last lap, and Denny Hamlin went to make a move in turn 1. Brad kind of went down to block, and they both wrecked, and Joey Logano passed them both and won. 2016 was Denny Hamlin, and 2015 was Matt Kenseth. Those were your last 5 winners of the Busch Clash. So, obviously the question is who I'm going to go with for this race, and in an 18-car field for Daytona, it's going to be interesting to see exactly how they line up. If you remember the pack racing last year when they basically removed the restrictor plates and put on tapered spacers, and we saw a lot better pack racing in 2019. There was not a lot of single file racing, much at all, really. I mean, there's really little to none single file racing all last year. So, I mean, my question is an 18-car field, that's about half, less than half of a normal field. So, to me, I'm not so sure if we're going to see a lot of pack racing or not. Maybe we will. So I guess we'll see. My prediction is I guess we'll just probably see the two lines playing out, the outside and the inside, and I'm sure at some point they're going to get strung out to single file racing, but who knows? And my prediction for this race, I'm going to go ahead and go with Denny Hamlin. I mean, Denny Hamlin has always been good on super speedways, at least in recent memory, and he's a 3-time winner of the Clash. It's just kind of hard to bet against Denny at a restrictor plate. Obviously, he's the defending Daytona 500 champion, and so I would say it would be hard to bet against Denny Hamlin this weekend, and he's coming off a really good 2019, so my prediction for the Clash, I say Denny Hamlin wins this exhibition race at Daytona. So there you have it. There's my prediction for the Clash. I'll be back on Sunday evening to review the Clash and, of course, probably preview the duels a little bit as well as the Daytona 500. So it's a big week, everybody. Speed weeks. Everybody enjoy. I'll be back on Sunday to recap the race. And that is it. I'll talk to you later.